There's a sound that money makes. It's not the crinkle of a bill or the clink of a coin. It's the sound of a perfectly filtered pool on a Sunday afternoon. It's the pop of a champagne cork that costs more than most people's weekly paycheck. It's the lazy, contented chatter of beautiful people who have nowhere to be and all day to get there. On the surface, that was the sound of Chad's life. But if you listen closely, past the sound, past the pop, and past the chatter, there was another sound, a quieter one. The sound of envy. It doesn't make a noise, not at first. It just sits there, in the pit of a stomach, curdling the expensive champagne. And on one perfect sun-drenched afternoon, that quiet sound of envy will become a scream swallowed by the water in a rich man's pool. This is the story of Chad Ellison's last pool party. Welcome to Behind the Yellow Tape. I'm Mimi, and here we share some of the most spine-chilling, gut-stirring, mysterious crime stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. So if mystery and crime is your cup of tea, then you'll definitely get your fill here. We upload every Wednesday at 6:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you love a midweek dose of suspense, whether from your favorite seat, the car, before bed, or during your favorite activity, then leave a like to help build the algorithm. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss an upload. Now, let's take a step behind the yellow tape. Chad was the kind of guy who made friends easily. Too easily, some may say. He had that rare, irritating gift of being effortlessly charming. He'd slap you on the back and suddenly you were telling him your life story, buying him a drink and feeling like you've known him for years. It wasn't an act, it was just Chad. And on this particular Sunday, he was in his element. The mansion belonged to David Lawrence. David was your classic rich buddy. New money, flashy, and desperate to be liked. His house was a monument to insecurity, all glass and sharp angles, perched on a hill overlooking the city. He threw these parties to populate his empty spaces with people, and people came because David had the best pool, the best bar, and the best connections. Chad was the unofficial mayor of these gatherings. He'd move through the crowd, a human sun warming everyone he touched. Leaning against the marble-topped outdoor bar, watching the human sun do his rounds, were two of his closest friends, or rather, two guys who had spent years in Chad's orbit, pretending to be his friends. You have to understand the history first. Chad, Bailey Shipman, and Neil Lemur went way back. College days, cramped apartments, cheap beer, and big dreams. Back then, they were a trio, the Three Musketeers, Chad used to call them, back when the nickname felt inclusive instead of hierarchical. They survived failed exams together, celebrated broken hearts together, crashed on each other's couches when life got thin. There was a time when Bailey would have taken a bullet for Chad and Neil would have helped dig the grave for whoever pulled the trigger. But somewhere along the way, the geometry of their friendship shifted. Chad's star kept rising while theirs seemed permanently tethered to the ground. It happened gradually, the way rot sets into fruit, invisible until suddenly the whole thing collapses inward. Bailey was the first to feel it. Sharp, ambitious Bailey, who spent his days as a graphic designer pouring his creativity into products that bore other people's names. He'd watch Chad climb corporate ladders without breaking a sweat, land apartments with skyline views, and attract women who never seemed to even notice Bailey standing right there. Every success Chad had wasn't a success. It was a mirror reflecting everything Bailey hadn't become. The promotion at the marketing firm, the corner office, the way Chad would casually mention a bonus over drinks, not bragging, just existing in his own golden light. For Bailey, each triumph felt like a small personal slight, a paper cut, harmless alone, but after years, thousands of paper cuts will bleed a man dry. Neil's rot ran deeper, colder. He was quieter than Bailey, the kind of quiet that makes you lean in closer without realizing why. He nursed his beard with the intensity of a coiled snake, and his jealousy had a birthday. A specific Tuesday 3 years ago, when a woman named Laura had chosen Chad at a house party not unlike this one. Neil had been in love with her, or what passed for love in his calibrated heart. She laughed at Chad's jokes, touched his arm, and left with Chad that night. Neil watched her go from the kitchen doorway, and something in him calcified. It wasn't just Laura. It was every Laura. Every woman who looked past him. Every room that brightened when Chad walked in. He'd smile at Chad, laugh at his jokes, but behind his eyes, there was a ledger, and he was always keeping score. That's who they were now, not friends. Just two men standing in the shadow of a human sun, wondering how to make the light go out. From their spot at the bar, they watched Chad dive into the pool, a perfect, clean entry that sent a small, respectful wave over the tile edge. Bailey remarked on it, his voice low and dripping with sarcasm, calling Chad the king of the world. Neil didn't look. He only commented on Chad's seemingly innate golden touch. Bailey scoffed at the idea of a golden touch, calling it nothing but blind luck. He pointed out how Chad, not David, was always the de facto guest of honor at these parties. Neil, with a hint of a smile on his lips, warned Bailey that his words sounded a lot like dislike. Bailey's response was sharp, a bitter declaration of love for Chad, the kind of love that made you want to give someone a permanent gift. The words hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. Neil finally turned, his eyes narrowing with interest. He saw his own reflection in Bailey's anger. The seed was planted. It was just the two of them, the sound of the pump and the sight of Chad climbing out of the pool, the water glistening off his tan skin, and a beautiful woman handing him a towel. An hour later, the party had moved into that hazy golden hour of late afternoon. The light was softer, the conversations more slurred. They found David, the oblivious host, away from the main crowd, holding court by the grill. David stood behind a stainless steel behemoth that cost more than most people's cars, tongs in hand flipping artisanal burgers for people who'd probably take 2 bites and abandon them on the edge of a plate. He was in his element here, playing the generous benefactor, the man with the house and the pool and the grill big enough to feed an army. Smoke curled up around his designer sunglasses, and his laugh was just a little too loud, just a little too eager to please. David collected people the way he collected watches, displaying them, showing them off, but never quite understanding their inner workings. Neil approached him first. He complimented the party, the house, and the way David always knew how to bring people together. David puffed up at the praise like a peacock spreading his feathers, waving a hand as if to say it was nothing. Bailey joined in, leaning in conspiratorially, lowering his head like he was about to share a confidant. He suggested that David was the most generous guy they knew, and that most people took his hospitality for granted. They never appreciated the effort, the cost, or the vision it took to pull off something this flawless. David brushed it off, but he was listening. You could see it in the way his smile tightened at the edges, the way his eyes flickered toward the crowd. Neil pressed further, painting a picture of people who breeze in, steal the spotlight, and leave the host with nothing but the cleanup. He didn't name names. He didn't have to. They watched David's eyes drift over to Chad, who was now doing a cannonball into the pool, sulking a group of girls who shrieked with delight. The laughter was loud. It was Chad's laughter, booming across the water, claiming the space without even trying. David's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. David, with a flicker of insecurity in his voice, tried to defend Chad, calling him a good guy. Bailey agreed, but the word good came out twisted. He called Chad the best and framed it as a problem. The best at everything, unable to help himself. They left it there, a tiny crack in the foundation, a suggestion. They walked away, leaving David with his spatula and a sudden, unwelcome thought about whether he was just the backdrop, the guy with the pool who paid for the booze. As the sky began to bruise with twilight, the two of them found a quiet corner near the pool house, away from the music and the laughter. Neil reached into his pocket and pulled out a small prescription bottle. It was a bottle of something his veterinarian cousin had left in his guest room months ago, something for large animals, something Neil had pocketed without fully understanding why until this moment. He'd been holding on to it like a dark insurance policy, a contingency plan he hoped he'd never need. Underneath the bar, he showed it to Bailey. He explained its properties: odorless, tasteless. A few drops in a drink would simply make a person tired, really, really tired. Then he laid out the rest. Get him in the house, away from the witnesses, and let the pool tell the rest of the story. Bailey's heart hammered against his ribs. This was real. This was happening. He could feel his pulse in his throat, in his temples, in the tips of his fingers. But then he looked across the patio and saw Chad standing by the tiki torches, surrounded by people hanging on to his every word. He saw the way Chad laughed, head thrown back, carefree and golden and utterly oblivious. And Bailey thought about another decade of this, another decade of watching Chad win, another decade of being the sidekick, the setup man, the guy in the background. The fear was suddenly much smaller than rage. He gave a single, barely perceptible nod. The plan was brutally simple. Neil would spike Chad's drink. Bailey would be the distraction. They'd lead a sleepy, compliant Chad into the house with the intentions of getting him a place to lie down. The house, with its cavernous rooms and hallways, would be their privacy. And the pool would be the final scene. They found Chad by the tiki torches, holding a fresh rum and coke, the condensation beating on the glass and running down his wrist. Bailey greeted him with an exaggerated enthusiasm, calling him the man of the hour. Chad, with his infuriating smile, said he hoped they were only talking good things about him. Neil, taking the glass from Chad's hand with a friendly pat on the back, offered to get him a refill, claiming that the current one looked watered down. He walked to the bar with his movements calm and deliberate. He ordered a fresh rum and coke, heavy on the rum. The bartender, a college kid earning extra cash, slid it across the marble counter without a second glance. Neil waited until the kid turned to help another guest. Then, with his back to the party, he pulled the orange bottle from his pocket. His hands didn't shake. He unscrewed the cap, tilted the bottle, and let 4 precise drops fall into the amber liquid. They disappeared instantly, leaving no trace, no cloud, and no evidence. He recapped the bottle, slipped it back into his pocket, and picked up the glass. No stirring needed. The liquid did the work for him. He walked back to Chad, his face arranged into a friendly smile, and handed him the glass with a simple toast to the king. Chad laughed, clinked his glass, and drank. The effect was subtle at first, a drooping of the eyelids, a slight stumble in his words. Chad remarked that the rum had hit him fast, that he was more tired than he thought. Bailey, his voice soothing, agreed, blaming the long day in the sun. He suggested Chad go inside and crash in one of David's guest rooms for an hour. Chad, his head lolling, his words slurred, agreed. Neil and Bailey moved to either side of him, propping him up, their grip firm and purposeful. They led him past the laughter, the music, through the sliding glass doors and into the cool, silent house. The air was different in here, sterile, smelling of lemon polish and money. They half walked, half dragged him through the cavernous living room, past the abstract art David didn't understand, and towards the back of the house where another set of glass doors led out to the pool deck. Their original plan was a bedroom, but the house was empty. The party was outside and the pool was right there, a dark, glassy rectangle reflecting the last sliver of twilight. It was now or never. They stopped at the edge. Chad was barely conscious, a rag doll in their arms. His breathing was shallow. Neil whispered that it was time. Bailey felt a surge of pure, unadulterated terror, but it was too late. They were here. With a final desperate heave of shared hatred and panic, they pushed. Chad didn't even make a sound. There was no dramatic splash, no thrashing. He simply slipped into the water like he was doing his traditional dive off the deck at the end of the pool party. He sank, a dark silhouette swallowed by the deeper dark of the water. A few bubbles broke the surface, lazy and quiet, and then nothing. For a long, terrible moment, they just stared at the water. The pool pump made its steady, indifferent song. The party continued to laugh on the other side of the house. It was done. The 911 call came in 20 minutes later. A hysterical woman, one of the guests, screaming that her friend Chad had gone for a swim and hadn't come back up. David, playing the part of the distraught host, pulled him out. Paramedics worked on him for 45 minutes on the cool towel, but Chad Ellison was already gone. A tragic accident, too much sun, too much rum, a terrible senseless drowning at a rich buddy's house. Everyone bought it. The guests, the first responders, the initial investigators. It was a closed case, a sad story to tell at future parties. But a few days later, a man in a sterile room under a harsh white light bent over Chad's body. Dr. Neil Patel, the medical examiner, wasn't interested in the water in Chad's lungs. He was looking at the color of his blood. It was wrong. It was a strange, dark, chocolatey brown, the color of a body starved of oxygen in a very specific way, not drowning, but poisoning. The toxicology report came back positive for a rare, fast-acting sedative, a veterinary drug, something used to calm large animals, a drug that in the wrong dose would shut down the respiratory system, making the victim feel overwhelmingly sleepy, making them helpless. It was a drug that left a signature. The tragic accident became a homicide investigation, and homicide detectives are very good at taking a party guest list and turning it into a list of suspects. They talked to everyone. They noticed the cracks. They saw the way Bailey's hands shook when they asked about his friendship with Chad. They heard the too careful answers from Neil. They felt the desperate, nervous energy from David, who was terrified his perfect party would be tied to a murder. A guest mentioned seeing Bailey and Neil whispering by the bar. Another remembered them being strangely absent just before Chad went missing. They pulled phone records, saw the text between Bailey and Neil, not confessing, but coded, nervous, and planning. But it was the little things that broke them. In Neil's apartment, a meticulous search found a tiny trace residue in the pocket of the jeans he wore that day, a match to the drug. And in Bailey's car, a receipt for a gas station stop on the way to the party, a stop he'd lied about, a stop where the gas station security camera showed him buying a bottle of soda and meeting Neil in the parking lot. The arrest went down on a Thursday morning. Bailey was at his desk staring at a computer screen when two detectives appeared in the doorway of his cubicle farm. They didn't make a scene. They didn't have to. Everyone in the open-plan office watched as Bailey rose slowly, his face draining of color, his hands already cuffed behind his back before he could say a word. A woman in the next cubicle started crying. Bailey just walked, his expensive shoes squeaking on the polished concrete floor. Neil's arrest was different. They caught him in his apartment parking garage just as he was getting out of his car with a bag of groceries. He saw them coming, two unmarked sedans blocking the exit, 4 doors opening simultaneously, and for a moment, he just stood there with a carton of eggs in one hand and a loaf of bread in the other. Then the eggs were on the ground, yolk mixing with rainwater, and his wrists were cold with steel. He said nothing, not then and not later. When they were brought in separately and shown the evidence in small windowless interrogation rooms, the wall crumbled. Bailey broke first. 2 hours of questions, of photographs, and the detective leaning back in his chair and saying, "We already know, Bailey. We just need to hear it from you." And then the sobs came in, ugly and heaving. He told them everything: the years of jealousy, the seed planted in David's mind, the orange bottle, the walk inside, the push. When they arrested Neil, he said nothing. He sat there in his own interrogation room, that cold, quiet look in his eyes, yolk still dried on his shoes, and his ledger, finally, irrevocably closed. In the end, it wasn't the big things that caught them. It wasn't their grand plan or perfect motive. It was a brownish tint to a dead man's blood, a trace of medication found in the pocket, a lie about a gas station, and a carton of broken eggs on concrete. They say money can't buy happiness. It also can't buy loyalty. And it can't wash away the stain of envy. That stain is permanent. For Chad Ellison, the party was over, but for Bailey Shipman and Neil Lemur, the silence was just beginning. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Mimi, and this has been a step behind the yellow tape. See you next Wednesday at 6 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time.